all the Western Roman emperors, Augusti and Caesars from the first Imperator Caesar Augustus Octavian to Romulus Augustulus, the last emperor of Rome, Italy. The 11 imperial dynasties of the Caesars of Rome, Italy. The first in the West was founded in 27 BC by Augustus Caesar Octavian, or named the Julio-Claudian dynasty, as he was a relative of Julius Caesar, his granduncle, soon after defeating the combined forces of Mark Antony and Cleopatra, his lover, at the sea battle of Actium in 30 BC. This was followed by the second, the Flavian; third, the Nerva Antonine; fourth, the Severan; fifth, the Gordian; sixth, Decian; seventh, the Valerian; and the eighth, Karen dynasty. These 8 were the dynasty of the Principate. Then the 9th, Constantinian dynasty, followed by the 10th, the Valentinianic dynasty, and finally the last in the West was the Theodosian dynasty, founded by Emperor Theodosius I, or the Great, in 395 AD, and ended with his son Honorius's nephew Valentinian III in 455 AD, who was murdered because he foolishly cut off his right-hand man, the very capable Roman general Flavius Aetius, whom he had suspected of usurping him as Caesar and placing his own son on the throne. The last 3 dynasties were named the dynasty of the Dominae, for their sons were lord or emperors dominating both Western and Eastern Rome. The Caesars or emperors of Rome, Italy. The first from the Julio-Claudian dynasty was Caesar Augustus Gaius Octavianus, or Octavian, who ruled for 40 years, 7 months and 5 days from 27 BC to 14 AD. He was succeeded by Tiberius Caesar, who ruled for 22 years, 6 months and 27 days from 14 to 37 AD. Next was Caligula or Gaius Caesar, who ruled from 37 to 41 AD for 3 years, 10 months and 6 days, followed by Claudius Caesar, who ruled for 13 years, 8 months and 19 days from 41 to 54 AD. Finally, the dynasty of Julius and Claudius Caesars were ended when Nero, who succeeded Claudius, committed suicide after being deserted by the Praetorian Guard and sentenced to death by the Senate. He had ruled for 13 years, 7 months and 27 days from 54 to 68 AD. Caesars or emperors of Rome, Italy. In 69 AD, soon after the death of Nero, Caesar saw the year of the 4 emperors, with each ruling in succession. The 6th was Galba Caesar, ruling for 7 months and 7 days from 68 to 69 AD. Then by Otho, who had murdered him and ruled for only 3 months and 1 day. At the same time by Telius, who was simultaneously proclaimed emperor by the armies of German Rhine region and ruled for only 8 months and 1 day. For Vespasian, the commander who was besieging Jerusalem at the time of Nero's death, quickly left Judea, leaving Titus, his general's son, there to finish the job. He seized the imperial throne from him with the support of the Eastern legions, who had also proclaimed him as Caesar. He defeated the armies of Vitellius and was proclaimed emperor by the Roman Senate. Then he ruled for 9 years, 11 months and 22 days from 69 to 79 AD, before passing the crown to Titus, his son, who had successfully destroyed Jerusalem and the temple in 70 AD. Titus Caesar then ruled for 2 years, 2 months and 20 days from 79 to 81 AD. He was succeeded by Domitian, his younger brother, who ruled for 15 years and 4 days before he was assassinated in a palace conspiracy in 96 AD. The Flavian dynasty ceased forcefully in the first civil wars of the empire from Emperor Vitellius during the year of the 4 emperors in 69 AD, and founded by his father Flavius Vespasian came to an end. Caesars or emperors of Rome, Italy. Marcus Cocceius Nerva was declared emperor by the Senate on the same day that Domitian was murdered. He was 66 years old and had served in the imperial court under the Nero, and then under the Flavian dynasty of both Vespasian and Domitian as consul. He ruled for only 15 months from 96 to 98 AD and passed the purple robe and golden wreath of Caesar without incident to his adopted son and heir-born in Italica, Spain, as a Roman citizen, who was the popular general Marcus Ulpius Traianus or Trajan. So was founded the Nerva Antonine dynasty. Upon the death of his adopted father, Trajan was declared by the Senate as Optimus Princeps, or best ruler. He reigned as sole emperor for 19 years, 6 months and 14 days from 98 to 117 AD. By the time of his death of a stroke in 117 AD, the Roman Empire reached the peak of its territorial extent, adding new territories after conquering and annexing Dacia, Armenia, Assyria, the Nabatean kingdom, and wresting Mesopotamia from the Parthian kingdom. He was succeeded by his cousin of Roman Italo-Hispanic family, Hadrian, whom he adopted as son and heir, who then ruled for 20 years and 10 months from 117 to 138 AD. Shortly before his death by natural causes, he adopted Antonius Pius from a senatorial family as his son and heir, who was Roman emperor for 22 years and 8 months from 138 to 161 AD. He died of an illness and was succeeded by his 2 adopted sons as co-emperors. Marcus Aurelius, who ruled from 161 to 180 AD for 19 years, and Lucius Verus, who ruled from 161 to 169 for 7 years and 10 months. Commodus, who was already ruling jointly with his father Marcus Aurelius from 176 AD until his father's death in 180 AD, then reigned as sole emperor and tyrant until 192 AD, when he was assassinated by his wrestling partner by strangulation in a palace conspiracy in his bath, aged 31. His death marks the end of the Nerva-Antonine dynasty and the Pax Romana, the golden age of Roman peace. This dynasty also produced the 5 good emperors, namely Nerva, Trajan, Hadrian, Antoninus Pius and Marcus Aurelius. Were not proclaimed emperor by birthright, which was bad, but by adoptive succession, whose rule were characterized by good governance, their own good lives, the goodwill of their subjects and the support of the Senate, the historians tell us. The Caesars, or emperors of Rome, Italy. The 5 emperors who claimed the title of Caesar in 193 AD were Emperor 19. Pertinax, who was assassinated after only 3 months by the Praetorian Guard, the 20th, Ligius Julianus, the 21st, Licinius Niger, the 22nd, Clodius Albinus, and the 23rd, Septimus Severus, who finally emerged the victor in the second civil wars over Niger and Albinus by defeating them and having executed Ligius Julianus. His ascension to the throne as the sole emperor marks the beginning of the Severan dynasty. He ruled for 17 years and 9 months from 193 to 211 AD, and was succeeded by his son and heir Caracalla, who then ruled from 211 to 217 AD, but he was already co-emperor with his father in 198 AD and with Geta his brother in 209 AD, whom he later murdered to be the sole emperor. He ruled for 6 years and 2 months and was murdered by his Praetorian prefect Macrinus, who ruled from 217 to 218 AD for a year and 2 months, and jointly with his 9-year son Digemenian in May 2, 2018. Both were executed by Elagabalus troops. Elagabalus, then a cousin and alleged illegitimate son of Caracalla, was proclaimed emperor 28 in favor of Macrinus and his son, and ruled for 3 years and 10 months from 218 to 222 AD. But he was also himself executed by the Praetorian Guards, having estranged from the Roman Senate and the people whom had become disaffected with his sex scandals, decadence and religious controversy in a plot conspired by his grandmother Julia Musa, who had earlier promoted him over his 2 predecessors. Elagabalus, whose real name was Antoninus, was only 18 years old when he was assassinated and was succeeded by his cousin Alexander Severus, who ruled as Emperor 29 from 222 to 235 AD, but was also lynched by his mutinous troops at the age 26 after having ruled for 13 years. So ended the Severan dynasty, which had ruled Imperial Rome for 42 years. The Caesars, or emperors of Rome, Italy. When Alexander Severus was assassinated by his own troops in 235 AD, the 4th Legion Italica elected their commander Maximinus Trax, or the Trajan, as emperor, who ruled for 3 years. But in 238 AD, which came to be known as the year of the 6 emperors in the 3rd civil wars of the empire, a senatorial revolt broke out, which led to the proclamation of Gordianus I and Gordianus II, his son, as co-emperors. But they were both killed in an African revolt after 3 weeks. In this predicament, with the forces of an angry Maximinus the Trajan marching on Rome to retain his throne, the Senate remained determined to defy him and elected two of their numbers, Eupienus or Maximus and Balbinus, as co-emperors. But they were rejected by the ordinary people, and a faction in Rome preferred Gordianus I's maternal grandson, Gordianus III. But Emperor Maximinus never reached Rome, for he was assassinated by the soldiers of the 2nd Legion of Parthia on the way. So Maximus and Balbinus then became undisputed co-emperors, but their reign was short, only 3 months. Both were distrustful of each other, and while they were arguing in the palace, Praetorium Guard burst into the room, seized and dragged them back to the Praetorium barracks, where they were tortured and hacked to death in the bathhouse. Thus their murder and death left the people's preferred candidate, whom the two co-emperors had also appointed, Gordianus III, as the sole surviving emperor. He was only 13, the youngest sole Roman emperor, and had ruled for 5.5 years from 238 to 244 AD. He died during a campaign against the Persians, possibly in a murder plot instigated by his successor Philip I the Arab. Thus the short-lived dynasty of the Gordians were ended. The Caesars, or emperors of Rome, Italy. Philip I the Arab, a Praetorian prefect of his predecessor Gordian III, was emperor from 244 to 249 AD for 5 years. He elevated his son and heir Philip II the Younger as co-emperor in 247 AD. When Philip I was killed in battle by Decius I in 249 AD, the Praetorium Guard murdered his son Philip II the Younger, aged 12, in Rome, who had ruled for only 2 years with him. Decius I, who succeeded them, was proclaimed emperor by his troops, after defeating and killed Philip I the Arab, and was recognized by the Senate as emperor from 249 to 251 AD for a year and 9 months. He appointed his son Herennius Etruscus, or Decius II, in June 252 AD as co-emperors, until both were killed in battle against the Goths in 251 AD. Then Hostilian, the other younger son and heir of Decius, succeeded his father and elder brother in July 251 AD, having been elevated by Trebonianus Gallus as co-emperor to placard the public when the Senate proclaimed him emperor after the death of both his co-predecessors. But he died in November 251 AD after 5 months of a plague, or probably killed by Trebonianus Gallus, the governor of Moesia and co-emperor, who then succeeded him with his son Volusianus. Gallus ruled for 2 years and 2 months from 251 to 253 AD, having appointed his son and heir, Volusianus, as co-emperor in 251 AD, who ruled for 2 years before both were murdered by his own troops, who were terrified of the usurper Aemilian, the commander of the army in Moesia, who was marching on Rome. Aemilian ruled for 2 to 3 months in July to September 253 AD, before he was also murdered by his own troops in favor of Valerian, another army commander in Rhaetia and Noricum. Thus ended the Decian dynasty and began the Valerian dynasty of the Roman emperors. In the interim between the death of the usurper Aemilian and the elevation of Emperor Valerian, there appeared to be another usurper named Marcus Silvanicus, an obscure emperor of Gallic or Celtic descent, who ruled very briefly from September to October 353 AD, known only by 2 coins discovered in 1930 and 1980. He was deposed and probably killed after only a few weeks or days. The Caesars, or emperors of Rome, Italy. The Valerian dynasty was founded by the commander of the Rhaetian army, a man of noble and traditional senatorial family. His army proclaimed him emperor in 253 AD in opposition to Aemilian, who was murdered by his own troops. He ruled for 6 years and 9 months before he was killed by the Persian king Shapur I by being forced to swallow molten gold after having been captured by the Persians in the Battle of Edessa in 260 AD. He was the first Roman emperor to be captured as a POW, which caused shock and instability throughout the empire. He was succeeded by his son and heir, Gallienus, who was co-emperor with his father in 253 AD, and he then reigned alone as emperor from 260 to 268 AD, a total of 15 years as emperor. But at age 50 he was assassinated, stabbed to death by his army officer in a conspiracy involving his successors, Claudius II and Aurelian. Saturninus, his son and grandson of Valerian I, was co-emperor with him from January to September 260 AD, when he was murdered by the soldiers of Postumus, the emperor of the Gallic Empire in the west. So ended the Valerian dynasty, followed by 6 succeeding generals, senator and emperors. The first was Claudius II Gothicus, the victor over the Goths at the Battle of Naissus, who then seized power and ruled for 1 year and 7 months from 268 to 270 AD before succumbing to a plague. Claudius III Quintilius, his brother, was proclaimed emperor after his death, but ruled for as short as 17 days from April to May 270 AD. Some historians said it was 117 days, or about 6 months, before he committed suicide or killed at the behest of Aurelian, the supreme commander of the Roman cavalry, when he was proclaimed emperor by the Danube legions. Emperor Aurelian then ruled for 5 years and 5 months from 270 to 275 AD. He has many unprecedented military victories against the Goths, the Vandals, the Sarmatians, the Carpi, the Palmyrene Empire in the east and the Gallic Empire in the west, which reunited the Roman Empire after it has almost crumbled under the crisis of the 3rd century, the pressure of the barbarian invasions and the internal revolts, thus earning him the nickname, Restitutor Orbis, the restorer of the world. But he was murdered by the officers of the Praetorian Guard, who feared him for his strictness and severe punishment in curbing corruptions. Tacitus, a princeps senatus or chief senator, was then elected as emperor by the Senate after a delay of 8 months. He ruled for 6 to 7 months from 275 to 276 AD and died of a fever or probably by assassination. Florianus, his half-brother, who had been appointed by Tacitus as Praetorian prefect, then proclaimed himself emperor with the Senate recognition and much of the empire. But he ruled for only 3 months or less, from June to September 276 AD, when he was assassinated by his own army, who rose up against him in favor of Probus, a successful general who was proclaimed emperor by the Senate. He reigned from 276 to 282 AD for 6 years and 3 months, but was also murdered by his own troops, who supported the next emperor Carus, thus ending the reign of the 6 succeeding emperors after the Valerian dynasty. The Caesars, or emperors of Rome, Italy. Marcus Aurelius Carus was proclaimed emperor by his soldiers before, or probably after, he murdered Probus, the previous emperor. He was a senator and was promoted to Praetorian prefect by him, bestowing the title on Caesars on his 2 sons Carinus and Numerian, who were co-emperors with him, the eldest in the west and the younger in the east. He ruled for only 10 months, from September 282 to July 283 AD. He died during a campaign against the Sassanid Empire in Persia, likely of illness or possibly killed by lightning. His 2 sons Carinus and Numerian succeeded him as co-emperors. Numerian, the younger brother of Carinus, ruled jointly with him from July 283 to November 284 AD for 1 year and 4 months, while Carinus ruled for about another year until July 285 AD, or total 2 years, when he was betrayed and assassinated by his men, while fighting, and was defeated at the Battle of Margus by Diocletian, who was earlier proclaimed emperor by his troops. Thus the short-lived Carian dynasty came to an end when Diocletian, a cavalry commander under Carus, their father, defeated Carinus, his eldest son, in battle. The Caesars, or emperors of Rome, Italy. In 293 AD, 9 years after he was proclaimed emperor by his troops, and after he had defeated Carinus in battle in 284 AD, Emperor Diocletian instituted a system of government called the Tetrarchy, or rule of 4 co-rulers. It was by dividing the empire between 2 senior emperors called the Augusti and their juniors and designated successors, both called the Caesars. This marks the end of the crisis of the 3rd century, also known as the Imperial Crisis, which started in 235 AD when the last emperor of the Severan dynasty, Severus Alexander, was assassinated by his own troops, resulting in a 50 years turbulent period during which there were at least 26 claimants to the title Imperator or Emperor. That period of military anarchy was from Emperor number 30, Maximinus the Thracian, to Carinus, Emperor number 55. Then Diocletian took over and reigned from 284 to 305 AD for 20 years and 5 months in the east, together with Maximian, whom he appointed as co-emperor or co-Augusti of the West in 286 AD, who ruled until 305 AD, when both emperors voluntarily abdicated in favor of their respective juniors or successors. In the east it was Caesar's Galerius, while Maximian's successor in the west was Caesar's Constantius I or Chlorus, meaning the Green, the father of Constantinus I, well known to us as Constantine the Great. Emperor Galerius ruled for 6 years from 305 to 311 AD in the east, while Emperor Constantius I, in the west, ruled from 305 to 306 AD for 1 year and 2 months. Both had ruled as Caesars or Caesars in the Tetrarchy for 12 years from 293 to 305 AD, and were later proclaimed as Augusti or emperors when their predecessors abdicated. They both died of natural causes aged 53 and 56 respectively. The Caesars or emperors of Rome, Italy. The 6 rival emperors to Emperor Constantine I's or the Great's throne in Rome. When co-Augustus or joint emperor Constantius I died in 306 AD, Severus II was elevated to succeed him by co-emperor Galerius, who had ruled the east. But the Constantius I's son, Constantine I, was acclaimed by his father's troops in York, Britannia, as co-emperor in the west. Meanwhile Maxentius, the son of former co-emperor Maximian in the west, seized power after being initially passed over in the succession. He, together with his father whom he offered co-rule of the empire, deposed Severus II when he arrived in Rome. He was co-emperor from August 306 to April 307 AD for 8 months. Maxentius then ruled as co-emperor for 6 years, from 306 to 312 AD, before he was defeated in the civil war against Constantine I, who had marched on Rome to claim his imperial throne. He perished by drowning in the Tiber River at the Battle of the Milvian Bridge in October 312 AD. Licinius was co-Augusti or emperors of the East from 308 to 324 AD, ruling for 15 years and 10 months before he was defeated, deposed and executed by Constantine the Great, who then reunited the Roman Empire under him as sole ruler, ending the Tetrarchy or 4 co-rulers system started by Diocletian, which instead of ending any civil wars in the empire, had further exacerbated them by adding more rival contestants to the throne. Maximinus, also known as Doza, named Caesar by his uncle, Galerius, the co-emperor of the East, was proclaimed emperor by his troops and ruled from 310 to 313 AD, and was defeated by Licinius in the civil wars of the Tetrarchy after 3 years. Valerius Valens, a general under Emperor Licinius, who was elevated by him to be co-Augusti or emperors instead of Constantine I, and ruled for only 5 months from October 316 to February 317, was executed in the lead-up to the peace settlement between Licinius and Constantine the Great. Marcius Martinian, a senior bureaucrat under Licinius, was also elevated by him as co-Augusti or emperors in the west for only 2 months from July to September 324 AD, as a challenge to Emperor Constantine, was also deposed, banished and executed by Constantine after he emerged the victor in the civil wars of the Tetrarchy or 4 co-rulers. Thus Constantine I became the Great and was able to continue the Constantinian dynasty founded by his father Constantius I, the second co-Augusti or emperors of the West, as the emperor now of both East and West, or the imperator of the entire Roman Empire, by 324 AD. The Caesars or emperors of Rome, Italy. The Constantinian dynasty, started by Constantius I in 305 AD, was succeeded by Flavius Valerius Constantinus I, or better known as Constantine the Great, who was Roman emperor from 306 to 337 AD. He emerged victorious in the civil wars of the Tetrarchy against Maxentius the usurper and rival co-emperor in the west, and against Licinius, who was co-emperor in the east, and when the other 4 rival emperors, Severus II, Maximinus Doza, Valerius Valens and Marcius Martinian, were eliminated. He was the first Roman emperor to convert to Christianity. In the Edict of Milan of 313 AD, he declared tolerance for Christianity and ended the persecutions of Christians in his empire. He convoked the First Council of Nicaea in 325 AD to solve and end the Arian controversy which was raging at that time. He died at aged 65 of natural causes. He had ruled for 30 years and around 10 months. At the time of his death in 337 AD, he divided up his empire among his 3 sons, heirs and co-successors. They were Constantine II, his eldest son, who ruled for 2 years and 7 months from 337 to 340 AD, and Constantius II, who jointly ruled with his elder brother from 337 to 361 AD for 24 years and about 2 months. Constantine II was killed in a civil war against his other brother Constans I, who ruled for 12 years and 4 months from 337 to 350 AD, but was overthrown and killed by an usurper Magnentius. Thus the triarchy or rule of 3 of Constantine the Great's 3 sons were ended when Vetranio, a general of Constans I, another usurper, was proclaimed emperor after Constans I's death in 350 AD. Then, following the death of Constantius II in 361 AD, Julian, his cousin, was declared Roman emperor by the Gallic army and ruled as sole emperor from 361 to 363 AD for 1 year and about 8 months. He was remembered as Julian the Apostate because of his rejection of the Christianity of his uncle Constantine the Great and promotion of Neoplatonic Hellenism in its place. He was the last non-Christian but a Constantinian emperor of Rome and was mortally wounded during a campaign against the Persian Sassanid kingdom. The Caesars or emperors of Rome, Italy. In the interval between Emperor Constans I of the Constantinian and the Valentinianic dynasty which followed, there was one attempted successor or usurper named Julius Nepotius, who was a member of the Constantinian dynasty who ruled Rome for only 28 days from the 3rd to the 30th of June 350 AD, but was killed and his head put on a lance and borne around the city by another usurper who is not of the Constantinian dynasty, Magnentius, the commander of the Imperial Guard units, who also sought to seize the throne from Constans I, co-emperor in the west, by cornering and killing him while he was hunting. But his bid for the Emperor of Rome was unsuccessful, although he was elevated by the army as emperor for 3 years from 350 to 353 AD. Though he was defeated in battle by Constantius II, Constans I's brother, the co-ruler of the East, and so he committed suicide by falling on his sword. The third usurper was General Vetranio, who was proclaimed as emperor in opposition to Magnentius, the usurper who had killed Constans I, and was soon recognized by Constantius II. He ruled for about 10 months from March to December 350 AD, before he was dismissed in peace by Constantius II. The fourth usurper was Jovian, a Christian imperial bodyguard who was hastily declared emperor following the death of Julian the Apostate by his soldiers. He ruled for 8 months from June 363 to February 364 AD. Following his death, 2 brothers, Valentinian I and Valens, succeeded him as co-emperors by dividing the empire between them. The elder Valentinian, sometimes called the Great, elected by the army, was co-emperor of the West from 364 to 375 AD for 11 years and about 9 months, while Valens, his younger brother, elevated by him, was co-emperor of the East from 364 to 378 AD and ruled for 14 years and 4 months. When Valentinian I died of a stroke aged 54 in 375 AD, he was succeeded by Gratian, his son and heir, who had ruled as co-emperor with him in the West for 8 years since his elevation to Augustus in 367 AD, then ruled for a total of 16 years, but at age 24 was overthrown and killed by another usurper, Magnus Maximus. Valentinian II, another son of Valentinian I, was elevated at the age of 4 by the Polonian army as co-emperor of the West at his father's death in 375 AD. He ruled for about 16 and a half years from 375 to 392 AD. Their uncle Valens was co-emperor in the East. Valentinian II, the last ruler of the Valentinianic dynasty, was found hanged, probably by suicide, aged 21. Thus was ended the dynasty of the Valentinians. The The Caesars or Emperors of Rome, Italy. The three usurpers in the West who attempted to topple and succeed the Valentinianic dynasty. Magnus Maximus was emperor from 383 to 388 AD for 5 years after he usurped power from Gratian, son of Valentinian I. He was executed by Theodosius I after he invaded Italy to depose Valentinian II, Gratian's brother, but was defeated in battle with the Eastern Roman emperor. Victor, his son, who was elevated by him as co-emperor in 384 AD, was also executed at the order of Theodosius I in 388 AD. Eugenius, the third usurper in the West, was elevated by a Roman Frankish army general, named Arbogast, to emperor in France in 392 AD following the death of Valentinian II. But both were defeated in battle against Emperor Theodosius 2 years later in 394 AD, with Eugenius executed and his general committing suicide. Theodosius I was appointed by Gratian to replace Valens, his uncle, in the east after he was killed in the Battle of Adrianople against the Goths in 379 AD. He is also called Theodosius the Great and ruled as the last emperor of both the East and the West for 16 years and died of natural causes. His younger son Honorius, who succeeded him, then became the emperor of the Western Roman Empire for 28 years and 7 months from 395 to 423 AD and died of edema or swelling of the body parts like arms or legs due to fluid retention in the tissues. His elder brother Arcadius, who was the heir, also succeeded Theodosius I and became the emperor of the East in the same year 395 AD. Constantine III, a Roman general in Britannia who declared himself Western Roman Emperor in 407 AD, tried to usurp the throne from Honorius by defeating him in several battles and was recognized as co-emperor by him in 409 AD before he lost the support of his men, and abdicated in 411 after 4 years. He was captured and executed shortly afterwards by another general, Constantius III, who was elevated by his brother-in-law, Honorius, to be co-emperor in February 421 AD, but he ruled for about 7 months and died of natural causes in September that same year. On the death of Honorius in 423 AD, Joannes was proclaimed in Rome as Emperor of the West, but he moved his base of operations to Ravenna and ruled for 2 years until 425 AD, when he was defeated by the Eastern Roman army, captured and beheaded. After the death of Honorius in 423 AD, Valentinian III, a son of Constantius III and a nephew of Honorius, was elevated by the Eastern Roman Emperor Theodosius II as Emperor of the West in 425 AD at the age of 6. He ruled for 29 years and about 5 months until 455 AD, before he was murdered at the age of 35. He was the longest and last of the emperors of the Theodosian dynasty of Rome in the West. The Theodosian dynasty under Honorius, the younger son of Theodosius, who ruled the West, was usurped twice by Priscus Attalus, who was the first non-Christian pretender to the imperial throne in Rome. He was a Greek from Asia Minor, a senator and a praefectus urbi or urban prefect of Rome, and was proclaimed emperor twice by the Visigoths in an effort to impose their terms of the ineffectual Honorius ruling from Ravenna. He held the title of emperor in Rome for a few months from 409 to 410 AD, but his reign was ended by Alaric believing that it was hampering his negotiations with Honorius. He then later held the imperial title for a few months from 414 to 415 AD before he was abandoned by the Visigoths. The Caesars or Emperors of Rome, Italy. The last Western emperors before the fall of Rome to Odoacer the barbarian king in 476 AD. Petronius Maximus, a prominent senator who proclaimed himself emperor for 2.5 months from March to May 455 AD after seizing power and instigating the death of Valentinian III and his widow, he forcefully married to secure his throne. But he was lynched by a mob and stoned to death in the lead-up to the Vandal Gaiseric sack of Rome in June 455 AD. Avitus, a prominent senator of Gallic Roman extraction, then was proclaimed emperor by the Visigoths and recognized by the Roman Senate after the death of Maximus, the usurper. But he was deposed by his Germanic general Ricimer and Roman general Magellan, who defeated him. He was forced to abdicate as an emperor after ruling for 1 year and about 8 months from July 455 to October 456 AD and demoted to become a bishop. He died shortly after, possibly poisoned, strangled or starved to death by his general successor Major Ian. Major Ian was then proclaimed as emperor by the troops and reigned for 3 years and about 7 months from December 457 to August 461 AD before he was deposed and executed or beheaded by Ricimer, the Romanized Germanic general whom he had conspired with to depose Maximus earlier. He was succeeded by the senator Livius Severus, enumerated as Severus III, whom Ricimer, the Germanic commander-in-chief of the Western Roman army, had put on the throne and voted by the Senate in November 461 and ruled for about 4 years and died of natural causes in November 465 AD. Anthemius, who was a son-in-law of the Eastern Roman Emperor Marcian, succeeded him, having been elevated by Marcian's successor Leo I. He ruled from 467 to 472 AD for 5 years and 3 months, then was murdered, beheaded by Ricimer's nephew Gundobad. Then Olybrius, son-in-law of Valentinian III, but a puppet of Ricimer the barbarian general, was proclaimed emperor, having been elevated by him in opposition to Anthemius. He ruled for only about 4 months from July to November 472 AD and died of dropsy. The next emperor to succeed him was Glycerius, who was a commander of the palace guard and was elevated by Gundobad, the real power behind the throne, like Ricimer his uncle who had died. He ruled for 1 year and 3 months when he was deposed by Julius Nepos, the head of the Roman army in Dalmatia, who was proclaimed emperor and recognized by Zeno, the successor to Leo I, the Eastern Roman emperor. He reigned for 1 year from 474 to 475 AD and then was driven out of Italy by Orestes, the master of the Roman soldiers, and ruled a Roman rump state in Dalmatia after Rome fell to Odoacer in 476 AD until 480 AD for another 5 years before he was assassinated by Orestes, who had already put his son, Romulus, as Augustus or emperor on the throne on the 31st of October 475 AD before he was deposed by Odoacer the barbarian general on September 4, 476 AD, after having defeated and killed his father, Orestes, thus effectively ending the Western Roman Empire in Italy. The last Roman emperor was only 16 years old when he was deposed, but his life was spared by Odoacer on account of his youth and beauty, and was allowed to retire, with an annual pension of 6,000 solidi or gold coins, exiled to an estate at a great castle del Ovo or Castellum Lucullanum near Naples, Italy. Thus the Western Empire of the Roman people, which first began in the 753th year after the founding of the city by Romulus and with Octavian as Augustus Caesar in 27 AD, the names, first of the founder and that of its first emperor Augustus, perished with this last Romulus Augustus, nicknamed Romulus Augustulus or Little Augustus, in the 476th year of the reign of Caesar Augustus' successor emperors. From this point on, the Gothic, Frankish, Germanic, Habsburg, French and Italian kings and holy emperors continued to hold the imperial power of Rome in the West, not to miss out on the historical fact that the Eastern Empire of Nova Roma, or the New Rome of the East, Constantinople, did not end but continued to flourish and prosper for another 1,000 years before it was also brought to its knees and defeated when the new capital was conquered by Sultan Mehmed II of the Ottoman Empire, who captured it in 1453 AD and renamed it Istanbul, the Islamic name of Constantinople, which remains until this very day. An overview of the Western Roman division or leg of iron from the Julio-Claudian dynasty, starting with Julius Caesar's rule as the first dictator from 49 BC to the teenager Romulus Augustulus, the last Western emperor in 476 AD when Rome fell to the barbarian King Odoacer, who then became the first king of Italy. So the Western Roman Empire did not die or cease to exist, as secular historians has recorded, as we shall see in the next slide, but in the interval of about 500 years from 476 to 800 AD, the Roman kingdom passed into the hands of 3 barbarian kingdoms of Odoacer's reign at first, then under the rule of the Ostrogoths, and lastly under the dominion of the kings of the Lombards, who also claimed the title, the King of Italy. Then in 800 AD the Pope revived the Western Roman Empire as the Holy Roman Empire under the Frankish King Charlemagne the Great. The Holy Roman Empire in the Middle Ages continued on in a series of declines and revivals until the 20th century, when Benito Mussolini on May 1939 proclaimed, after 15 centuries, the restoration of the Roman Caesars, decreeing total Italian sovereignty over conquered Ethiopia, and proclaiming Victor Emmanuel III as his king, emperor of that primitive land. Il Duce, meaning the chief in Latin, a nickname for Mussolini, gave back to his millions of people a reborn empire of the 7 fateful hills of Rome, so the Associated Press reported.